we are at the 2-minute mark. Let me stop the nice slide and say hello to everyone. My name is Noam Dror. I run solution engineering here at SecuPi, and happy to be here and talk a little bit about best practices in database management. And I'm happy to be joined by Kyle. Kyle, maybe introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Joyner. I'm a principal support engineer with DBeaver and support manager for the Americas team with them.
That sounds good. And you see a lot of customers managing databases and connecting to all kinds of databases. So that's great. So we're going to have a little chat here. And I think let's start with the big question, which is, what are the major risks in managing databases, right? What makes it uncontrollable, and what are the risks there? You want to take a bite into this?
Sure. I mean, the biggest pain point that we see for especially larger customers is just user and access management, being able to centralize that so that you're not trying to manage database credentials, Active Directory credentials, all in different locations where they're really wanting to try and unify with a single sign-on to control everything from a single access point. Excuse me. So technologies came a lot further forward with that, with Kerberos, Active Directory access, cloud providers do a great job, AWS with identity management, Azure, GCP, all the above have made leaps and bounds to control this in a single location. That's a huge addition versus where the old days as a DBA, you were going, okay, Steve's joined the company. Now I need to add him here, here, and here, and I have to control his access.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Even, just talking about the breadth and depth of the different databases and data platforms, right? You can have on-prem databases of different types, cloud-based databases in different types. There's a lot of shadow IT happening there, right? People are just spinning up databases that the organization is not aware of. So how do you manage all of that from one central point? That's a big challenge. So that's one. And even when you do know about all those databases, how do you control who gets access to it? What are the user accounts they're using? What are the authentication methodologies they're using? How do you audit everything they do? How do you, control what they do so they don't expose data, or they don't delete data, or they don't change data, right? How do you, the basics of security, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, how do you make sure all of that is happening with those data platforms? That's a big challenge. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So let's talk maybe about the best practices. So what, Kyle, what do you see as kind of top best practices of managing all those risks?
Number one is trying to use single sign-on systems with multi-factor authentication so we can ensure that you are who you say you are. Then next, of course, is password expiry in your single sign-on system so that you don't have stale passwords that could be lost, leaked, stolen, and then taken advantage of. The next most important thing, honestly, is exactly what you were saying, minimal permissions, which is where, it really becomes somewhat of a pain for some DBAs. And that's where being able to use SSO and group authentication. When I say group authentication, I mean, we define a role. The roles have these specific rights, and you're now a part of that group. So if Bob needs access to table A but not B, Bob only has access to that. Controlling in the read write. And then from there on out, of course, enforcing very strong passwords. And at the least bit, at your operating system level, encryption. So encryption at rest, encryption at use, and encrypting all data transmission between the client and the server, and protecting your network.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So you use a lot of best practices here, right? Encrypting the data at rest or in use, using single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, what we call a need-to-know approach. Those are the permission thing, right? Everyone just needs to get access to what they need to know, not everything else. Talked about password, which is good, and strong passwords, this is good, or even no password, right? There's a lot of passwordless authentication schemes today that are very good and allow users to have a better user experience while really making the authentication a lot stronger. I think one of the challenges that I see in the market is that all those technologies are there, but the database environment is not up to par to those technologies, right? So if you have like an old Oracle, a DB2, even if you just want to invest in a cheap Postgres database in the cloud, those are all kind of native authentication, username, password, which are very weak. That's a problem. So that's the first, challenge that I see here. The second challenge that I see is even if you have, weak authentication, you still need to manage all of those users. And in many cases, when I go to customers, I see that they have a lot of rogue accounts. So accounts that were there but no longer working there, accounts that were there but they moved to a different department, accounts that were there for an application but that application doesn't exist anymore. So you have hundreds or thousands of accounts in each database that should not be there. And each one of those accounts, especially if you have weak authentication like native password-based authentication, is an attack vector on the database. So how do I reduce that attack vector? So one of the things we see today is the ability to use very few accounts, 1, 2, 3 accounts within each database. Those accounts are protected very well. So you rotate the credentials. Let's say the database doesn't have single sign or multi-factor authentication option. What you do is you just rotate those credentials all the time to make sure those accounts are secure, but then you're using those accounts to connect the users into the database. So let's say Noam doesn't have an account in the database, but I can do multi-factor authentication for Noam, for myself. But then I will use a DBO or a kind of a DBA type of administrator account to log into the database, still controlling what I can do as Noam, the user in the database. That's the idea there. So that makes a lot of sense. So use a lot of best practices, as you said. I think the other one is once you're inside, we talked about permissions, need to know basis. But what does that mean, right? So need to know basis, as you said, can be on a table by table basis. So can you get access to the database? Can you get access to the schema? Can you get access to the table? Those are all good practices. But even if you have access, if I'm a DBA, I need access to all the tables because I need to see what's happening. That doesn't mean that I need to see the data itself. The fact that I can index something or the fact that I can create a table or drop a table doesn't mean that I need to see the data inside the table. So sometimes you need to do column level access control or dynamic masking or dynamic encryption. So the DBA doesn't see the actual data, but they can still perform their jobs. This is something we see now increasingly, right? Because you want to provide that ability to the DBA to do his management daily task, but you don't want to expose sensitive data. That's a big one. So dynamic masking is an important part there. And as we said, what accounts are there? Do you see a lot of kind of dormant accounts in customers that are using database management tools?
I mean, unfortunately, as we all know, if you've been a DBA for very long, auditing is the bane of your existence.
Right.
So usually, if you have the manpower and the time, it's kept up with, but that's, sometimes pretty far and few between. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you get those access accounts or maintenance accounts And, oh, yeah, I created an account just for us to be able to run backups.
Yeah.
Oh, we changed our backup methodology and that account is forgotten. And a lot of times those are just created with weak passwords because people are in a hurry. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's dangerous. And yeah, I mean, it's really common to see.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe now let's talk a little bit about auditing and logging, right? Because another thing that I see, we used to have this thing where you collected all the events and turned on events and had a lot of agents, but every database is now a little bit different. What are kind of challenges or solutions you see in that space of, logging, auditing of what's happening in databases?
Like you said, everyone has their own tools. Some of them have great tools. Some of them have not so great tools, just text logging of what it is, which makes it a real pain if I need to audit down to a user level. I mean, if anyone has used some of the older versions of MySQL and such, you're literally grepping text files trying to figure out what people did. It's a nightmare where like in our product now, there is an audit log to show every query that's been ran by which user. Um, it's much better. I think we're trying to make it even better with centralized logging. But yeah, it's a challenge because let's say, you have 100 databases and that's 100 different logs that you may have to audit looking for things where a product like CloudBeaver in combination with yours, everything is at a centralized location where your DBA and your security team can look at these things in one spot.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. So I think I see like four types of approaches to auditing and logging. The first one is, as you said, the old way where you turn on extensive auditing within the database, and then you treat each database separately. You either collect it to a central location, then you need to filter it and consolidate it and correlate it and figure out from each type of database, and each database is completely different, as we said, figure out what is happening there. So that's kind of approach number one. Approach number two, so approach number one is actually doing it locally in the database. Approach number two is collecting it into a central location, and that takes a lot of compute and a lot of time and a lot of knowledge of each one of the database. Approach number three, we see it more in privileged access management, solutions such as CyberArk and other PAM solutions, is session recording. So they would allow you to record the session, then you have a video recording of everything that happened. So that's nice, but it doesn't really tell you what happened, right? It just gives you, so it's good for after the fact. Oh, something is happening. Let's see in the camera what happened, but it will not alert you in real time. Something is bad happening, right? It will not give you any trends. It will not, so it's a problem. The other thing we see there that it costs a lot of money because those video sessions are pretty heavy. And if you have a legal obligation to store them over 7 years, that takes a lot of storage. So that's a lot of time. And then what we came up with is a way to create logs from the security solution, from a security layer. So we look at everything that is happening in front of those databases and collect all of those events in a standard way. So for when you implement a SecuPi solution, for example, we see all the activity that is happening within the database, and we log it in a standard way. So we create our own logs. We don't depend on the database logs. And then it doesn't matter if it's a MySQL or if it's an Azure SQL or if it's an Oracle or if it's a Redshift or if it's even a MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database, they would all look the same because you always have a user, you have data that they're getting access to, you have the classification of that data that they access to, and you have some sort of a risk score to say how important this transaction was, right? Did they get a lot of data? Did they get little of data? So that helps a lot of customers to say, okay, now I don't need to rely on the native logs. I need to make sure that everything is going through that security layer. We have solutions for that, but that's the idea of how to make it a lot more manageable, right? It's a standard way to look at database activity, which allows a lot of information about that activity, including risk scores and classification. So that's a big one for us. That's good. You want to see a quick demo of that, just to see how it works with Cloud Beaver?
Would love to see it.
Okay, so let me show you something pretty cool. Browser. Let's see, Cloud Beaver Enterprise. Okay. Oh, you'll see it from the beginning because I just expired my authentication, so that might be a good thing. Share this. Okay. So you see my browser, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to reload here, and because my session expired, you're going to see the entire flow. So I'm using Cloud Beaver, which is a web tool to connect to thousands of databases in the same place. I'm going to, of course, to use federation. So in this case, we're using Entra ID. I already authenticated. Of course, here is when you do the multi-factor authentication. So I can do an authenticator type of authentication on my phone. That authenticator can use my fingerprint or my face recognition. So if I'm doing this, now it knows this is Noam Dror who's logging in. You can see my username here, Noam Dror at secupi.onmicrosoft.com. So that's here. Now, if I want to go to a SQL, let's say this SQL doesn't use the same username. It uses native authentication, or Postgres that is using native authentication. As I said before, you do not want to have each individual user provisioned into the database. So I need to broker the connection into the database. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to edit the connection and say, hey, I'm going to log in with a username, with my username, and with any password, doesn't matter. The password doesn't matter here because what we are going to do now, because SecuPi is implemented on this Cloud Beaver, we are going to uh, we are going to uh, uh, broker the authentication with a different user. So I'm going to authenticate user. If you look here on the top, if I'm going to click this here, I'll log in. Look at the top, you'll see a quick window that opens and closes. So what happens now is that we actually authenticated against Azure Active Directory with multi-factor authentication SSO. And now I'm inside the database. So if I'm going now to do a select query, let's do select query on this. Cancel changes, okay. Cancel changes, I think I have a few things here, yeah. So if I'm going to look at the current user, what does the database think who I am? So let's see who I am. I'm a user called DBO. So even though I'm logged in as Noam Dror, and I had the credentials of Noam Dror, the database thinks I'm DBO, I'm the super user, okay? Now, if I'm the super user, that means that I should be able to see everything in this table. So let's run this query, select from customer. If I'm going to run this, what you'll see is that we are encrypting data. So here, the email is encrypted, the name is encrypted. Not only that, I want to show you something even more granular than that. I can see social security numbers, but if I'll go and find a user of status employee, so let's say this is my list of customers, and some of my customers are also my employees. So for an employee, I hope I'll find one. There you go, employee. Look at the social security number. It says private. So if the customer type is an employee, I'm hiding that social security number. This is the type of depth of permissions we can get into this environment. Now, sometimes it's, as I said, it's something I just want to make sure that you cannot do something as a super user. So we did a rule here to say, if you are going to a confidential table that has the name confidential, let's see what happens. Click run the query. Look at that. SecuPi message, object level denied, access is not authorized. So I'm a super user. In the database, I can do anything. I'm DBO, I can take over anything. But we are blocking the user from getting access to this table, regardless of what the database said. So think about it as a firewall for the database. We can actually decide what is happening there. And if we talked about the logging, so we talked about logging, so let's see what happened here. This is stuff around here. So if I look at what happened here, this is the transaction I did before. So I already know that I didn't show you that before, but I filtered all the data to show country US. And then I found out that you were accessing email and credit card and names. And then if you look at what I did here on encryption, I encrypted the credit card. I changed that social security number with private. I encrypted the name and I encrypted the email. So you can actually see what we did. You can see the query that happened. You can see the events that happened. You can see who's the original user. Remember, the database thought I'm using DBO, but here I'm actually showing you that I'm using noamdrawer@secupi.onmicrosoft.com. Right, so that's pretty cool in terms of the data that I can get out of it. And then if I look at the object level access, so here what happened is I was trying to get access to a confidential table, confidential. And because of that, there was a object level access control where we denied that access. That's the idea here, right? So we said we denied access to a confidential table. So that's pretty cool. I can show everything that is happening regardless of, let's say I'm going to a Postgres, I'm going to MySQL, an Oracle, or a Snowflake. It will all look the same to SecuPi. That's the nice thing about it. All the events would look the same. All the policies would work the same. That's the nice thing about that. So we're using the power of CloudBeaver to connect to everything with a web interface. I don't need any agents. I don't need to install anything. I have one place to connect to all of my databases. And then I can use any account I want to connect to any one of those databases, and I can control everything that the user can do, even if there are DBAs and super users. That's the idea there.
I mean, that's really great.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. And it's, that is an amazing power to consolidate all of those rules, filtering, auditing, and logging across every database that's listed inside CloudBeaver into a centralized location. You're checking on all the boxes for the audit team and security team pretty much in one location. That's amazing.
That's on top of what you guys are doing with CloudBeaver, which is managing who has access to what database, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? How do I manage in CloudBeaver what databases are available and who has access to which one of those connections?
Sure. In CloudBeaver, you can define a folder more or less in Cloud. There's another product I'll talk about in a second. And then I can either tell it at the user level or at a group level that you can see that connection. So if I don't want you to see that Postgres connection, I can hide it from you and you don't know it exists whatsoever. We can even get more granular with our team edition, where I can create projects and control who can see what's in those projects, kind of think of it as a workspace, and I can control what they can actually do with database results that come back to them. So combining either of those two products with the SecuPi product, you can have absolute control in one location. You've got a single point of access for all of your data, and that makes life so much simpler. If I only have to access or open up one endpoint for all of my database users to get access to my data versus, everyone that's been around has fought the nightmare of VPN access, multiple point access for trying to access each database. That's just a phenomenal control point to regulate and audit every bit of your access and your day-to-day operations.
Yeah, and I like that you can use it together with kind of a common firewall, right? Let's say I have my cloud, I can say only the CloudBeaver's, IP or range can get access to my databases. So it's the only way you can manage those databases. So together with that, you're kind of enforcing everyone to do that. Top of that, we have another nice solution where we actually say, we're going to look at the session table in each one of the databases. And then we'll say, if we see a session that didn't come from a SecuPi enforcer, we're going to report about it, alert about it. And if we want to, we can also terminate the session, disable the user. So we have the ability to say, if you're not using CloudBeaver, or if you're not using an approved method to get access to the database, we will see you, we will alert about you, and we can terminate the session and disable the user. So everyone has to go through the approved message. So that's also another cool feature where we can manage what we call session management, session monitoring, session termination. Those are, another tool in our toolbox to make sure that users are doing what they need to do in the appropriate way, in the approved way.
Yeah, so not only are you reactive, I mean, being able to view what people have done, you're proactive with your security to prevent data loss.
Right, right, right. So that's good. Okay, so I think let's prepare for the Q&A and see if people have any questions. So please type your questions in the Q&A button below in the lower side of your screen. Up until you come back with questions, I'll just do a recap of what we said. So the three best practices that we talked about is proactive protection, and that means manage the connections to the database, like Kyle said about what database you have, who has access to them, who needs to see that connection within your database administration tool. But that also includes dynamic masking of that data, dynamic enforcement of who has access to entities within the database. That's kind of the proactive protection you want to use. That's kind of best practice number one, or one way to protect your data. Number two that we talked about is what we call account protection. So you want to make sure that even you have legacy or databases that are not available for multi-factor authentication and single sign-on, you do have the ability to do it. And that's how you reduce the amount of accounts and rogue accounts within databases to make sure that those databases are not exposed with a big attack surface of accounts. So that's account management and account protection. And then the third one, we talked about common best practices to protect those databases. And that's the need to know permissions. If they do have passwords, strong passwords that are being updated on a frequent basis, single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, and then encryption at rest and encryption in use type of technologies. Those are good best practices to protect your databases. Okay, so now let's go to the Q&As. So first question is, how long does it take to establish such a platform? So Kyle, from your side, what does it mean? How does a project look like to create something like this?
To set up CloudBeaver, if you're familiar with containerization, especially if you've ever used Docker and such, you can have it up and running in about 10 minutes. It's really simple. Pull the repo, and it's a one-line command to start it up, and then go through the setup procedure, and you're ready to start adding users and databases. Our team edition, a little bit more complex, not a lot more. Have it up and running in 15 to 30 minutes if you're familiar with containerization.
That's amazing. So the good news is that we were new to CloudBeaver, and so it didn't take us 10 minutes, it took us like an hour, but that's fine. The nice thing is that after we implemented it, we actually updated the Helm charts for that CloudBeaver. So now we already have updated Helm charts for CloudBeaver. So you can integrate SecuPi within CloudBeaver just by downloading our Helm chart for CloudBeaver, and that's it. You're integrated. There's nothing you need to do. You just point to a SecuPi management server. SecuPi management server also takes a few minutes to install. And once you point to that SecuPi management server, your CloudBeaver is already there. Also, if you use the Enterprise Edition, it's also a few minutes of configuration to make sure a Enterprise Edition of CloudBeaver of DBeaver is instrumented. So yeah, we're not talking about a lot of time. I think the major amount of time is really planning. Who needs access to what? How do you know about them? How do you know how to find the correct attributes? Is it a group membership? So I think it's more like processes that takes time versus the actual implementation. But that's a good question. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay. The next question is what type of databases that are uncommon you see? So I'm guessing that's a question for you, Guy. What are the uncommon databases you see with the DBeaver technologies?
That's a great question. We connect to over 100 different databases, so they're just tons. I mean, I've been working on Yugabyte databases, Couch, Mongo. I mean, it's truly all over the board. I think the easier question to answer is what is the most common ones we see,
What are
which
the
of
most
course
common
is
ones? Yeah,
Postgres, Oracle, SQL Server.
yeah,
I mean, it's very hit or miss, but we connect to so many different things, and since it's open source, you learn a new database probably once a week
yeah,
trying to help a customer with something.
yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay, let's take one last question back here. Okay, last question is how do you integrate with SIEM solutions? So apparently, and I see it also in a lot of customers, they want to make sure that all the security events regarding databases are going to a central security events and information security management solutions. So things like Splunk or Cortex or things like that that collect all the events. So I'll start from the SecuPi side. We have a way to send all those events to a SIEM solution. We do it in multiple ways. We can send it via Kafka. We can send it via eLogs. We can send it via STD error from our container. So there are multiple ways to get those events into SIEM solutions. We also see customers that are sending those events into analytic platforms. So for example, we have customers that are saying, just send everything to Elk. I want to do my dashboarding and reports in Elk versus doing it in SIEM. But the majority of our customers are sending this to a SIEM solution. How does it work on the DBeaver side, Kyle?
Currently, we have our own logging system stored inside CloudBeaver.
Yeah.
I know we have an open feature request to be able to push it to a standardized logging system like Splunk.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think if it hasn't been implemented yet, I know it's in the near future.
Okay. So you can use us for until that feature is up and running, right? Because we see everything that is happening within DBeaver, and that can work well together. That's good. Okay.
Definitely.
So Kyle, it's a pleasure as usual to have a chat with you on interesting topics.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. It's always a good time to get to sit down and talk.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds good. Okay, so I think we'll finish here. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for listening and asking good questions. And we'll see you in one of our future webinars. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye. Bye.